All right, guys, we're out here doing some postseason scouting. Bow season across the Midwest is finally wrapped up. We're a couple of days removed from the Ohio bow season closing down, and we're taking the opportunity with the snow on the ground and this cold weather to really come in and break down some of these properties. And while we're doing that, we thought it would be a good idea to just talk about some of the 5 or 6 things that we do or take advantage of while we're coming in and doing our postseason scouting. So the first thing we try to keep in mind and we try to do while we're in here walking pieces and doing some of this postseason stuff is really paying attention to the wind or wind mapping. And what we mean by wind mapping is always carrying some kind of container with milkweed. And just as we're kind of walking through the woods or walking through these bedding areas or walking through these properties, just continuously dropping milkweed to see what the wind is doing. But we're not necessarily doing that haphazardly. We're doing that with the thought process in mind of what the predominant or prevailing wind is. So anytime we can get into a property with a prevailing wind, so this is a property that we're familiar with, we've hunted for 1 year, and we know that there's typically some type of westerly wind with a southerly tail on this piece. So today we have a southwest wind, and we're in here, and that's exactly what this is showing us. So the forecast is showing us southwest, but as we drop this milkweed, even though it's somewhat calm right now, we see that there's more of a southerly tail to it. So knowing that and having milkweed in your hand, it's one of the things you can come in here and kind of confirm when you're coming to these bedding areas, and really it helps tie the pieces together of why these deer are using an area, but also where you can physically hunt them, allow that deer to have the wind and still be safe in your stand location. So the second thing we'd like to take advantage of during our postseason scouting is something I already mentioned, and that's scouting while there's snow on the ground. When you get in here and there's snow on the ground, it's so much easier to kind of identify a sign, cut tracks, follow those tracks back to bedding areas or back to primary food sources. It makes it much more efficient, and it makes it much more clear how these deer are physically using these areas. Just for example, we came in here to kind of identify some bedding areas, both doe bedding and buck bedding, and we started from a primary food source, cut tracks, and followed those tracks kind of back into a bedding area. And the bedding wasn't necessarily where we thought it was going to be. We kind of struck out in our first thought as we were kind of thinking about where we thought these deer were bedding. While the tracks took us into that area, took us past that area, and actually led us into the area that we're standing in now, which is this high stem count, fallow field, red brush, thorn, thicket type area that butts up against this open hardwoods. So pro tip number 3 kind of ties into what I just talked about cutting tracks from primary food sources back to bedding while there's snow on the ground. Really, when you're coming in and breaking down these properties, if you're trying to kill bucks outside of the rut or even during the rut, you need to be able to understand where deer are bedding on your property. Because if they're not laying their head there during the daylight, the odds of you killing them are not very good. So that should be on your top of your priority list as you're breaking down these pieces, is to identify the bedding structure. So typically we're along the train of thought of Jeff Sturgis, where your bedding is going to be layered. So if you start that primary food source, you'll find doe bedding closer to that food source, and then removed from that doe bedding, there's going to be a second bedding opportunity, a third bedding opportunity, and more than likely those mature deer are probably going to be the furthest apart, or the furthest distance from that primary food source, just because they want to be isolated, they want to be left alone, and they don't want to deal with the high stress level of does. So as we come in and identify those areas, it's not just understanding where those deer are and why they're bedding there, but you need to be thinking about how to hunt them. So once you get into these bedding areas and find these beds, ideally you want to be able to get within that 150 yard, maybe 75 yard bubble of where you can set a stand up, do that stand prep, maybe now, maybe do it in the spring, maybe do it in the summer, but have those stand locations kind of picked out on these private pieces where you can simply manipulate access, sneak in, get a clean set, and have a fairly good hunt, or fairly good odds of actually killing that deer on your terms. The next thing we want to talk about is something that we all do through the season, and we all do through the postseason, but we're going to talk about it anyways, and that is using Onyx or some type of mapping software to mark these data points on your map to get a big picture or a 30,000 foot view of how that property is being used by all these bucks or all these does and deer in general. So as you get into Onyx, one thing that we need to do a better job of, I personally need to do a better job of, and I'm going to mention this, is using the capabilities within the app. And what I mean by that is dropping specific pins for specific areas, not just dropping a general pin and not giving it a description and not giving a photo. So within onX, you have the ability to not only color code your pins, so you can color code that by year or by category or type of sign. You can change these icons to mark rubs, to mark beds, to mark food sources, to mark scat, to mark tracks. So using those icons to identify what specific sign that is, using some kind of color scheme to identify, what year you found that specific piece of sign, but then also adding text to that icon, labeling what that is, where you found it, why you found it, and then also adding a picture to it. So I know if you look at my onX, on some of these public pieces, there's pins and things just scattered everywhere without much rhyme or reason. And often when I get into areas that I'm less familiar with, I can't remember why I put those pins there. So be sure that you have some type of system within your mapping software, whether that's onX, Base Map, HuntWise, whatever you're using, HuntStand. Use the full capabilities of that software. So when you come back 6 months from now, you have a clear picture of what was going on the property or in that area. So one of the last things that may seem pretty obvious, and you'll see that me packing around this bino bivy on my chest, is carrying binoculars while you're doing your postseason scouting or scouting just in general, especially in the postseason where everything is completely wide open. Not only is there no guessing, is that a rub over there, or maybe you come across a shed, but just having these on you at all times while you're in the woods allows you to be more efficient. You can get in and break down a property a lot faster without walking 100 yards to kind of verify whether you need to be over there or not. So make sure you got your binoculars. That's pro tip number 6, 7, 5, whatever that is. So that's a wrap for this video, guys. We're going to break down this property and go take a look at some of these other bedding opportunities. We've got a couple beds over here we want to go check out. So if you guys find value in this, leave a comment below or ask a question. If you want us to touch on or talk on a specific topic, be sure to leave that in the comments. Smash that subscribe button for us. We appreciate you all.